My name is Ari Montford. I'm a visual artist who aspires to create work that seeks answers. Personally, art comes from an experience that I cannot define. I am seeking to define that through my personal expression and search. I say that in all honesty because essentially if I know what it is, I cannot make it. If it's a question, then I can be always pursuing the question. I don't really relish the idea of answering the question, and I have no guidance after that. So it's always on this quest. There's something about the unknown experience, which I think is important to sort of explore. There's a process by which I have been working for most of my creative practice that comes from looking at self. And when I look at self, I'm a Black and brown person. And that has created for me the dialogue that I find within my work. And that experience further makes opportunity and at the same time creates this search that I am going back to the same thing I started with, is that I don't know what the answer is. I know that race is integral to the personal search. However, it doesn't define me as much as the presence of making the work, which really does focus on the social justice aspects of my image making. It's very real to me that I have ancestors that survived the Middle Passage, and that's just an astounding sort of process. And then my duality of being this Black Indian and having this indigenous sort of experience as well, we're relating to that, and having relatives that can trace ancestry back to beyond first contact. So I have all this blood going through me that is about continuum, and so it's there. It's just it's really a matter of recognizing that there's something larger about all this than I am, and so I'm on this collective journey in that regard. I'm thinking that this notion of art in challenging times is art can be connected to all time being challenging and involving challenging times. I'm not really being clear right there, except to say that many artists who are living in their contemporary lives and their contemporary times would work in a way in which addresses those particular issues in that time if they were so inclined to do so. And I try to remind myself that it's only been a little more than 100 years that we have been truly making art for art's sake, and that isn't even necessarily a clear sort of representation, but it's only been a little more than 100 years that artists have been truly free to make their own aesthetic sort of statements. For millennia, art was connected to the survival of the state, the survival of the monarchy, the survival of something that was related to a religious something or other. And so now religion has changed perhaps, and now there's more of this sort of sense of art being related to a level of identity in some particular way. But it's always been connected to reaching the sense of the parameters, looking at the parameters in terms of the process of making. And so I'm maybe part of a tradition. I'm not sure in that regard, but I'm trying to make new art, and that's a lofty sort of thing to say. But I want to make statements that question, yes, but I don't. At the same time, I want my work to be a part of a larger discourse. I come out of a tradition in making art that celebrates Robert Colescott, for example, and in terms of that sort of process. I come out of an experience that is very traditional in training, having worked with Grace Hardigan, and then Dr. Leslie King Hammond is somebody that has greatly impacted my voice in terms of the work. So I, in some ways, I'm connected to a lot of contemporary tradition in my image making, which I think gives the work some sense of place and community. That's the word, community. My work has some sense of community that relates to the process. I'm hoping that my work, and I'm hoping that art in general, can present a way for people to engage in larger conversations, and my work could become a vehicle for that conversation or participate in that conversation going forward. And I've had the ability now through my perspectives to want to and have the ability to, I think, to be connected through that process, and in part through what I'm realizing, which is important, the idea of thinking of legacy. And part of what I'm seeing as a possible legacy is to have your work connected to more institutional representation in terms of collections, institutional acquisitions, and to make that sort of a focus for me going forward. I see that as being instrumental in how people of color, particularly, can really engage in these notions of how to sustain the presence of culture, and to be a part of that sort of experience. And I'm not talking about a Western culture or a non-Western culture, or I'm talking about a culture that truly is representative of DEI in that regard, and to be really conscious of how that can be brought to bear. And further, as I have grandchildren now, so there's this whole notion of their future. I want to be somehow connected to that process of humanity. I'm not doing anything that I was supposed to do. How's that? I failed school. I repeated grades. I was a failure. My family was disappointed with me. I did not have aspirations to go to college. I didn't have any aspirations to go to college. There are many of us who are Black and brown who come from a Black elite and wind up going to the Howards and the other historically Black colleges and universities, Spelman, and on and on. And none of that was real for me in terms of my experience. And I only went to college because Martin Luther King was assassinated. If he had not been assassinated, I just would have been one more Black kid that did nothing in life. And so you must understand that my first day at college, if I had spent a day there and then not finished and graduated, if I had spent a day there all of my life, I could have said, hey, I went to college. I went to college for, I went there, I saw it, but, the idea of going to college and having that opportunity was really owed to the death of an individual. I mean, I never would have had that experience because the doors were opened up briefly at that point in time. And there were a number of folks that went through school, and the program that was initiated in those years was called Upward Bound. And Upward Bound was a program that was started at many institutions because the government was trying to respond as quickly as it could to the unrest. And we're talking about that unrest 50 some years ago. And here it is today and again. And so the changes have occurred and the changes haven't occurred. And, the numbers are all very similar now to where it was then, and there are some changes, yes, but the reality for me personally is that somehow the great creator, as I've come to understand, the great creator allowed me to get through it. And so, and today, I'm mourning someone who was this white man who greatly impacted my life and gave me entree to RISD, but at the same time, I earned that experience in terms of going to work there and to have that experience at RISD. Certainly, I did not grow up to work in the RISD Museum of Art. That was not on my agenda of things to do. So I'd have to say that it continues to amaze me because I always wonder now, on some level, what could I have done differently to actually change the experience to present more opportunity for myself? Could I have done something differently? I don't know. I would answer the question regarding what art tool I would have if I were on a desert island. I would simply rely on my own body because I have everything I need to make as part of who I am. And so I have my mind, my thought process. I have my physical form, which I can then take and do any number of things. If it's an island, I'm assuming it's a tropical island, not a frozen island. So I'm on a tropical island, and I've got all sorts of opportunities to use materials that are around me to make things with, and I literally mean that, to make things with. So I would just simply start making things, and I can do that without the sense of having art tools per se. But if I have the notion that everything is an art tool that is around me, then that's how we can understand the making process. You see art in everything that is indeed around you, and you can then bring it to a certain level of place and time by doing so.